Hi, my name is Lynette Roberts and I'm Director of Captivating Training Solutions. And you're watching this video because you're interested in looking at expanding your pharmacy capacity. But I want to start with a question for you to reflect on. Why do you want to expand your capacity? Now, is it because you're currently at capacity, if not overwhelmed? There's so many community pharmacies I've worked with that are feeling overwhelmed. If you look at the Royal Pharmaceutical Society Wellbeing Survey, it said nearly 90% of pharmacists are saying that they're at burnout. So is it because you're struggling to cope? Or is the other reason that you want to expand your business, to expand into new services, new areas? Now, why am I starting with that question? This is all about getting a vision, a goal in mind. And it might even be a stepwise process. Maybe the first step is, I just want to be able to cope just now. I want to relieve the pressure off myself and my staff. And then maybe the next step is, okay, now that I've relieved the pressure, how can I then look to expand my business? Whatever your motivations are, it's important to start there. You need to know where you're aiming for first, because this will help you see that you're making progress, that you're making success. And that's something we'll go into when we start talking about the model that you're going to use to help you expand that capacity. And that model is root cause analysis. So let's start with step one, define the problem. Now, at the very start, I asked you to reflect on, why do you want to expand your current pharmacy capacity? Is it because you and your staff feel overwhelmed, that you're not coping? If anything, you might have a workload backlog. It might be that you're not coping with your dispensing volume. It might be that you're trying to make way for new services. But define what it is that is the problem. And what you might find is it's a series of problems, but we can't fix them all at once. So it might be that you do a root cause analysis in a couple of different areas. We're going to give you tools to help you prioritise those areas. But let me share with you a story where someone defined their problem. Now, a pharmacist I worked with said that their problem was their dispensary was running 3 days behind on dispensing prescriptions, and that their vision or goal was to get it back to even half a day behind, something where they didn't feel this complete overwhelm. So that's defining the problem, and that helps us lead on to our next step, which is all about assembling data to find out, okay, what's the cause of this problem? What's going on? So let's look at that next step now. Step 2 of root cause analysis is all about assembling data. Now, this is all about taking a step back, getting a magnifying glass and looking at the parts of your business, assembling data to help identify what's causing the problem. So this is why we said start with defining the problem, and you might have a series of different problems. But let's keep with the story that I started with, which was the pharmacist that said, we're running 3 days behind on prescriptions. We want to get it to a bare minimum of a half a day behind so that we don't feel this pressure anymore. So when they took out their magnifying glass, they were looking at things like, okay, what's the volume of prescriptions that are coming through? How do we currently manage our dispensary? How efficient is that? And they looked at a number of different areas. They looked at even the staff rota. It was things like the skill mix of the staff to help to identify, okay, is the pharmacist constantly getting pulled into areas? Or it was even things like, I gave them a tool called a distraction audit, which made them identify areas where the process was getting interrupted, slowed down, because people that were involved in the process kept getting distracted and pulled away from it. So it was little things that they dug into, and we're going to give you those tools, and there'll be more supporting videos to go with this to get you to reflect on your business on these areas. And there'll be a tool called the Wheel of Waste that I'm going to give you, and it's just a series of questions, and you'll tick it in certain areas, and it might help you identify that maybe your problem area is your inventory, and that you're managing stock shortages and phoning wholesalers and all these different things are hoovering up your time, so it's actually contracting your capacity. Or maybe it is your staff skill mix. Maybe you've had a lot of turnover and flux in your pharmacy, and maybe you're working with dispensing staff and what you really need is an ACT to help you have more support in the dispensary. It could even be the efficiency of your dispensary. But hopefully that little audit, that little wheel of waste will help you identify the key areas and help you define your problems. So let's look at the next step in the model. Step 3, locate the root cause. So sticking with our story, we've got a pharmacist that's running 3 days behind in their dispensing and would like to get to half a day behind as a bare minimum. Now, they went and assembled all their data, looked at how they currently spend their time, they looked at their staffing mix, they looked at their prescription volume, they looked at what are the different things that are contributing to that backlog. And they did identify a number of different issues. So one of them was their staff skill mix. That what was happening is they were running with a pharmacist and a dispenser because they'd recently lost their ACT. So the pharmacist was getting pulled in and they didn't have that extra pair of hands to help cope with that dispensing volume. It was even things like identifying that the constant interruptions from the phone, like the pharmacist always getting pulled into phone calls that were unnecessary. Patients phoning up, can I speak to the pharmacist? The staff just handing over the phone and they're saying, can I order my repeat prescription? Did that really need a pharmacist to get involved? And so all these little nuggets were hoovering their time and contracting their capacity. So by identifying those little root causes, you can start to do the next step, which was to find corrective or even preventative solutions. Let's look at that in the next step. So step 4 in the process is all about, now that you know your root causes, what can you do to either correct the problem or prevent the problem? Now, we said that in the root causes for this particular pharmacist, there was a number of issues. We just lost an ACT, which obviously makes us a man down. That's a person that's not there to help us generate more of those prescriptions. So that's going to have an obvious impact. It was things like their inventory management. So again, the management of stock shortages, having to phone wholesalers and chasing things up was really time consuming. But even things like the constant interruption through the phone ringing that was pulling the pharmacist away from that important dispensing process. So now that we've identified all these different things, it is about, okay, how do we fix those different things? So we're going to look at one of them, and it was amazing how this one thing made such a difference, and that was all about the disruptions to the pharmacist, what was taking the pharmacist away from the dispensary. So things like the phone calls from patients and the queries on the counter. So this is what we're going to look at. So we're going to correct this and come up with the next step, which is an actionable strategy to fix it. So keep watching to find out what the pharmacist did next. So step 5, create actionable strategies. Now we've said we've identified a root cause, and in the one that we're focusing on is the disruptions to the pharmacist. We've found a corrective measure, something that can potentially prevent this, and it's all about identifying, okay, what was the most common reasons that the pharmacist was disrupted. So we're using the phone as an example of the disruption. So the staff kept a record for about a week as to what were the most common phone queries, literally just a piece of paper by the phone, and every time they picked it up, they wrote down what were the patients calling about. And from that, the pharmacist had a really open and honest discussion with her team to say, okay, here's a pattern I've found. The most common phone calls were, is my prescription ready yet? Can I order my prescription? And so from that information, she worked with her team to say, okay, which of these queries do you feel confident to handle? Because does a pharmacist really need to get involved to see if a prescription's ready? No, the staff are perfectly capable of doing that. And so she got that agreement. And so it was one tiny little thing that made a huge difference to that team. And that was a question that rather than when a patient would call and say, can I speak to the pharmacist, the staff would feel empowered to actually ask the question, can I ask, what are you wanting to speak to the pharmacist about? And then again, you might get a bit hesitant and say, well, that's for me and the pharmacist to talk about. You might get some people like that. But if you were to say, okay, you might be waiting 10-15 minutes because the pharmacist is super busy, but I'd love to help you. So it was empowering the staff like that. And so from that, they could identify, well, I can help you. And through that tiny little thing, by empowering them to ask that question, it helped massively reduce the amount of times the staff actually had to go to the pharmacist and say, can you take this phone call? Can you take this phone call? Can you take this phone call? And you can imagine how interruptions like that is hoovering your capacity. So it's interesting how a little tiny thing like that, an actionable measure that they put in place, can make such a tremendous difference. And so that leads us on to our last step, which is all about monitoring the solution. So let's talk about that. So we're at the final step in the process, which is all about looking at whether the actionable strategies that we've put in place to either correct or prevent these root problems is actually working. So let's continue with our story. We said the pharmacist was focusing on the root cause being consistent disruptions from the dispensary that was taking them away from being able to process those prescriptions. So from that, it started with a piece of paper. It wrote, writing down how many disruptions were there on a daily basis. What were the disruptions about? How many of these disruptions didn't need the pharmacist? And so from that data alone, you can monitor whether these actionable strategies are working just by looking at, did it actually reduce the amount of disruptions or even the type of disruptions? And by putting in those actionable strategies, by empowering our staff to even ask that one question, whether it be on the phone or on the counter, for anybody that says, can I speak to the pharmacist? That they ask, what do you want to speak to the pharmacist about? Because they're super busy. And so that made a huge difference, and they felt empowered to really identify, can I handle this, or does it really need the pharmacist? Now, hopefully this has given you a bit of food for thought and how, starting at the very beginning, that by defining that problem, by doing this process, this root cause analysis, and getting a magnifying glass in your business, that it can help you identify any inefficiencies that's potentially stealing your time. So I hope you'll look for the other videos in the series that's going to give you more ideas and thoughts that you could look at your business to help expand your capacity. Thank you so much for watching.